Hello, hi, welcome back to Call Your Coven. I am Bee, my pronouns are she, her, and I am your numerologist.
I'm Jeanna. My pronouns are also she, her, and I am your resident astrologer.
And I'm Meg. My pronouns are she, they, and I am the resident tarot reader.
And we are super excited to be here. This is our second episode in February 2025, but I do think we've been talking about doing this episode since at least September of last year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been in the docket for a while and has become it's only gotten higher and higher on the list as varying health things have happened over like Q4 and Q1. So we're here now.
We
Crone
are here
Coven.
now.
On it, Crone Coven.
Yes, yeah. So we are going to be talking chronic illness and disability and the intersection of health with magic and creativity and all of the things that go under those umbrellas. I promise to find my words once we
You're doing
start
great.
talking about it.
Everyone's doing great.
This is just a conversation, and it's, I think, going to be really interesting for us to talk these things out in real time and then hear what the listeners have to say, like alongside us as people who themselves may have chronic illness or disability, and then kind of get the incumbent pressures, or at least experience the incumbent pressures sometimes within witchcraft into culture and spiritual modalities of like, but I don't have the energy to do that. But I don't have the physical ability to do that. But I don't have the time to do that. Like, that's
Yeah, and I don't
a
have the
hard
money to do
thing.
that.
I don't have the money. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
there's a real, like, rubber meets the road, I think, around a lot of the very pat advice and pat, spells and rituals that get thrown out as like, oh, well, this is what you have to do. And it's like, let's actually consider our own individual contexts for that.
Yeah.
Totally.
So that's what we're going to do today.
That is why we're here
Mhm.
now. Well, I know how we want to kick it off, but who wants to kick it off?
Sure, I can go first. So, by way of getting into this topic, we're just going to give you the inventory, like the inventory list of which
This is how we
illnesses,
live.
health issues, disabilities do all of us live with. We all have different intersections of those things. So myself, the physical, I will say, like the physical chronic stuff is very, very tied up in the mental chronic stuff. Because a lot of my stuff is comorbid. Some things I have known I had my whole life, like migraines. Also migraines run in families. My mom had my mom still has bad migraines. All my aunts, my sister, my cousins. But I got my first migraine when I was 8, and they became increasingly chronic once I was in college. And I have gone through varying periods I've been in the ER for migraines more times than I can count. I have gone through periods of life where I had debilitating, like lay in bed migraines for weeks at a time. So it's not fun. I don't love it, but I've always known I had that. And then, as is the case so often, we figure other things out as we get older if we don't grow up in a family where this kind of thing is talked about, discussed, acknowledged, which I definitely did not grow up in that kind of family. Anxiety, very obviously, was an issue that I started to address in my 20s. And only in the last few years have I added hypermobility / EDS and ADHD to that list. And I have to say, like, for me, the singular, I haven't been diagnosed with EDS yet or a different hypermobility thing, because it's just been bottom of the list with all the varying hospitalizations and other surgeries I've had over the last few years. But that in particular, like, which I learned from TikTok, I learned what hypermobility was from TikTok. And I just thought that's how I was. I can always touch my toes. I can always stretch. Like, my joints are incredibly unstable. Like, I've sprained my ankle, fucked up my feet, torn ligaments more times also than I can count. And I was like, oh, I'm just weak. Oh, I'm just a bendy, stretchy mess who can't like walk upright without significant effort. And that learning what that was, I feel like blew my world wide open and made so many aspects of my life make sense. Like, I appreciate that not everyone wants a diagnosis, seeks a diagnosis, but I think that having language, having a word that all of that coalesces under, has made such a difference for my ability to treat myself with more gentleness of like, oh, it's not that I am like a child and can't walk. It's that my ankles like will give out at the slightest provocation. Yeah, I think I hit everything. Oh, and I've had multiple abdominal surgeries within the last few years, which I will hopefully not continue to have because they're just taking organs out at this point. So, you know.
First of all, thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah.
And that's so generous. And I just don't want any of us to walk away from this conversation not
Mhm.
really like understanding how generous even just being honest and open about these things are, because it takes so much energy to talk about them
Yeah.
and like over and over and over again. But I think that you're the perfect person to start this because you've brought up so many points that are important to me. Like, I don't have many diagnoses. I am seeking them. I also have been totally expanded by the works of other disabled folks like Sophie
Mhm.
Strand, who is like, you know, very much a diagnosis will not explain and or help me in many
Mhm.
ways. And I understand that a lot more, unfortunately, now than ever. But I agree that like these labels, just like in queerness, I feel like queerness and illness like go really hand in hand, which is also unfortunate because I'm like, this is the future the Republicans want.
I mean, we joke about that even here, though. We joke about that together, how like ADHD, insomnia, might like it's the starter pack.
It
It's
is.
like,
Yeah, yeah,
what, what's in your queer coming out starter pack? Like, what mental illness do you have? Do you have
Yeah.
depression,
Choose
anxiety?
at least one.
Like all like who do we know who is queer who isn't at least dealing with anxiety and or depression? Like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, and those, you know, are
Congratulations. Honestly, you're doing great.
right. If that's you,
If that's
love
you.
yourself today.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that's also important to think about. And also in just the ways that health issues and like chronic health issues, whether it's physical or mental, if they are life altering for you, if they do impact your life, then that just is your experience. Like,
Mhm.
bodies are absolutely not machines. They are not one size fits all. Like, I think the lens of homogeny that we use when we look at the human body and the human experience is like,
Mhm.
why are we doing that? It just is so not real or true. And it really keeps people from getting specific supports that they need, because ultimately
Yeah.
that, and then I will tell you what I have and what I don't have. Uh, yeah, so I just think like all of these things really keep people from having the support that they need. And that
Mhm.
is something that a label or a diagnosis can bring to you a little easier, a little, not always, but that's the hope. Yeah, because I don't know what the hell I have. So I definitely, I mean, I've been medicated for anxiety since I was 17, and on and off, like long bouts of off, because I am just really sensitive to medication. But the last couple of years, I've had major physical health issues, and it's been muscular, you know, the whole system, essentially. My whole body has just been fritzing out. And I still don't know what's causing it. I had like an 8-month period in 2023 into 2024 that the word I use for it is a myopathy. And every doctor's like, are you a medical professional? I'm like, no, I've just read a lot of things that I didn't want to read.
No, just in that way, we're all like disabled or chronically ill people sort of become medical professionals in their given necessary field where they're like, no, I can speak
Yeah,
very competently about this. Thank you so much. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. So I had like an 8-month period of just daily pain, really limited mobility. Everything felt very frozen. So like I was like waddling around if I could walk, because my hips were not happening. And then I had like 6 months of good health in 2024. And then around the same time, which is also bizarre. And this is part of my journey. We need a better word for journey. I need to stop saying that.
Your trial and tribulation.
There you go. My
Yeah.
trials and tribulations. Yeah, that really sets the tone.
A pilgrimage, if you will.
Right.
Indeed.
Yes, my pilgrimage with my own self, and my own body. Yeah, so late last year, like the opposite started happening, where I was so frozen the year before, I was just like falling apart that this past year. And so I have a bunch of fractures in my back and my neck. And so like physical disabilities, like I'm getting that placard and I'm getting it forever. So I don't know. I don't have a diagnosis yet. I am currently back on medication for what has now been diagnosed as major depressive disorder. So
Congratulations.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.
So a lot of a lot of what's happened in the last few years has really impacted my mental health as well. And so November and December, our little couplet of months that was going to give us a preview into 2025, was like all of my health issues really came to the surface.
Yeah.
And it was like, you need to handle your depression. You need to handle the fact that you're very broken and possibly very ill. And no one's really paying attention to that. So yeah, but it was strange to all of a sudden find myself with all these new words to describe myself with that were also very scary. So I think, yeah, and then it is happening on kind of a weird schedule. And so it's hard. My witch brain wants to be like, ooh, there are no coincidences and like what synchronicities. And then I also feel silly for that sometimes because it's like I can't make meaning out of whatever this madness is. A lot of chronic stuff is uncertainty. And so these spiritual practices and these tools like really do become important because it's like this is what we've been training for, to like go through hard shit and be okay and have supports. And yeah, I mean, it just sucks to be in this. And I think that's also an experience that is probably pretty typical for people who live with daily stuff, is that sometimes you're in crisis and sometimes you're in waiting and then you go back into crisis. And like there's a weird rhythm to that as well. And it never becomes routine, but there is like a rhythm there that you're like, okay, for these days out of the month, I know I'm going to be down for the count. Or, okay, I have 6 months of good health. That's awesome. But now I'm in another flare. And what does that mean? And what has to shift again? So it's all complicated.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, there's a lot of required adaptiveness and flexibility and what's today going to be like, and the compassion for self that's required with that can be really, really hard to access sometimes when we're in a flare or a longer period of uncertainty or pain or illness or whatever it is. There's a lot that goes into it. So I will tell y'all my stuff. The first thing I was officially diagnosed with, which didn't happen until college, because to your point, we don't always know what's normal. And sometimes we need other people to help us figure out what's going on. I have a very rare, very severe kind of insomnia called idiopathic insomnia. I could talk about this for hours and I won't because it's not that interesting, but essentially it's primary insomnia, which means that it is not because of sleep apnea or restless leg syndrome or chronic pain or stress or anxiety. It is just insomnia that just exists. And I've had it since I was an infant. My parents didn't really know. I'm the oldest, and there's plenty there to unpack that we're definitely not going to do on this podcast. But essentially, I didn't know that I didn't sleep normally. I thought everybody just went to bed and read all night until 5 a.m. and then tried to sleep for half an hour, and then their alarm went off at 6 and they went to school. I thought that was normal until I went to college, and my college roommate was like, what in the literal hell are you doing? Why don't you sleep? So I got my first diagnosis when I was in early college, and started doing the litany of medications, which I am no longer on because of all the side effects. But yeah, essentially I get a couple of hours of sleep a night. A good night for me is about 4. Less than that, and uh
The
what's the
countdown
word?
starts.
Symptoms? Yeah, the count starts basically.
Yeah.
Gina's seen this more now that we like live together and are in a romantic relationship. Yeah, there's a lot to say about it, but basically I'm deeply exhausted all the time. I have a lot of brain stuff because 39 years of not sleeping will do a lot of weird things to your brain and body. So it's not exactly just mental and it's not just physical. It's a combination of both. It impacts my memory, it impacts my cognitive function, it impacts pain, it impacts my ability to not walk into walls. like so it's
That's
definitely
not an exaggeration.
no, it's literally not.
Yeah.
I can't talk. I like say people I love's names and pronouns and things incorrectly when I'm not tired. It's not. It's just it's very weird what brains do when they're deeply, profoundly exhausted.
Mhm.
So that's probably the biggest one. I did also get a diagnosis of major depressive disorder in my mid-20s after some just massive crisis points. There was really no choice. It was go to therapy or don't survive. So got that diagnosis in mid to late 20s as well. And again, it was kind of one of those things where I was just sort of riding it out and thought everybody felt like this all the time, and eventually realized no, they don't. So I have good drugs and a fantastic therapist that I owe an email to, and yeah, those things are just the chronic lifelong things. The recent thing for me is that a fibroid that I've almost certainly had in my uterus since high school has been flaring really badly the last couple of years, and I've just been terribly sick with it, down for the count for about half a month,
Yeah.
like third to half of a month every month.
At this point, it's
Um,
like 2 weeks a month. Meg
it's
is
awful. So
fully out of commission.
yeah, it's
Right.
brutal. Self-employment is a gift. It's the only way I could do anything. We'll probably end up talking about that too, I bet.
Mhm.
But yeah, so but the good news is that hopefully if Elon Musk doesn't take the government apart and Medicare doesn't fall apart and the hospital system doesn't collapse, I will be hopefully getting a hysterectomy. I scheduled for the end of February, which is huge news. I've been trying to get this for like a decade. So
Really?
um so this is the positive part, is that 2 of my 3 things do not have people doing. There's nothing. It's just a thing you live with and learn to cope with. But the fibroid, get the uterus out of there, and I will hopefully have a pretty substantial impact to my quality of life post recovery. So that's the good news.
And
Yeah.
then we will have all had hysterectomies within a year of each other.
Doing
I
great.
know.
Look at
Okay,
us.
so that fact alone feels incredibly witchy to
It
me.
does.
Yeah.
You know,
Actually. Yeah.
incredibly witchy, but also
If we're giving birth to
fibroid.
other things, we don't need a uterus. You don't need a uterus to give birth creatively.
I've been thinking a lot about that because I just had one on Christmas Eve.
Yeah, you did.
And
Can't believe you both beat me to it.
I know. Well, yeah, mine was a shock to us all, but
Truly.
Actually, it was.
It was legit a surprise, right?
it was because so I want to talk about fibroids because they're increasingly becoming common in the cultural language too. Like,
Yeah.
I have never known more people who have fibroids or are getting fibroid surgery, and multiple housewives across like different franchises
Mhm.
have been talking about their fibroid surgeries on the show this
Oh,
season.
fascinating.
wow.
Yeah,
I love that.
Uva in
That's
New
very cool.
York and Bose
I'm not a
on
housewife
Beverly
person. I
Hills.
apologize.
You're the housewife representative
not.
for the
Oh,
We
reality
don't go
show.
here. We watch Survivor. We watch Traitors. I watch well, you and I watch Love Island.
we
Love to.
do.
But yeah, I think you're the only
I am
housewife
present for
representative.
Love Island.
Okay.
Yeah, Gina is in the room with Love Island.
Yeah, I just think it's really interesting that
Mhm.
that is happening and that more people are having surgeries,
Mhm.
like reproductive surgeries
Mhm.
now. And I think a lot about the current times. My essay, Getting Sick as the Empire Falls, is definitely
good.
going to be a series because now I'm having an outpatient experience, and that is wild for putting things into perspective. And again, the system is actually present tense changing,
Mhm.
and you want to make sure that we can all continue to get the care that we need
Yeah.
as it is chaotic. So yeah, I think the timing of reproductive
Mhm.
stuff is happening. Yeah.
I think it's so interesting that you bring that up, and I love that it's becoming more mainstream. Like, I feel like it being on a Housewives franchise is
Huge.
huge because I know so many people watch those shows. But I'm thinking about, like, yeah, you writing this, like, not like healthcare expose per se, but like a real window into what it's like to be a patient. And even like Jeanna, you writing about this, like this publishing piece that just came out the other day about like submissions. And I feel like there is this culture that is becoming increasingly loud of like, let's talk about the things that we've been told we shouldn't talk about. Let's share information wherever we can, as often as we can. And let's talk about the stuff that we were taught we should be ashamed of, like reproductive health or bodily autonomy, or, you know, weird sections of industries or things that are meant to, you're just supposed to know somehow or are expected to be quiet about. I feel like with Trump taking office, with Musk taking office, I guess, whatever the fuck he's doing, and with all of these just very blatant attacks on bodily autonomy and reproductive care and all of these things, there is really becoming more of a cultural momentum around, let's name these things for what they are. Let's talk about what's important and necessary when it comes to advocating for yourself. And let's stop like letting these things hide in the shadows when they're things we actually really deeply need to talk about, like fibroids. So many people have fibroids and they can make you really, really sick and have a huge impact on your fertility, your mental health, your physical health. I've been talking for a minute. I
No,
get very
it's
deep
super
about this, but
true.
yeah.
It's super true. I mean, just to, well, Gina said this when I was in the hospital, that hospital is a 12th house
12
place.
hour face.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I think what we're talking about, like reproductive rights, this like, how can we share information? How can we be helping each other out in this time is like eighth house, ninth house stuff, you
I
know?
defer to y'all on that.
Yeah.
And so it is like an unveiling, you know, hey, we need to talk about this. But also witchcraft has always been deeply political because the people who were persecuted and will probably be persecuted again are the people who are saying like, hey, abortion is not available at a state level, but I have an herb that can help you out with that. And just that transference of information
Yeah.
would be called, you know, well, I don't know what they're going to call it now, but
Yeah.
like they did call it witchcraft,
Mhm.
especially if something went wrong,
Yep.
you know, which things go wrong with doctors and hospitals and systems all day, every day. So,
Especially here.
yeah, especially here. And our healthcare system is designed to keep you using it, which
Yeah.
means keep you sick and keep
Yep.
you not getting the care that you need. And I think I still just, I guess for anybody listening, because I feel like all these things are ethic based
Yeah.
conundrums as
Yeah.
well. And
Yeah.
so
100%.
I am for whatever works for you. I'm for whatever blend of Western, Eastern, spiritual,
Yeah.
whatever information you want to use to take care of your body and feel good in it. Like that's what
Yeah.
I'm for. So,
Same.
I appreciate you saying that, B, because I feel like I have such a mixed relationship to hospitals and institutionalized healthcare because on the one hand, like growing up, it was partly that we were poor and didn't have money, and partly that my very like rural working class family, you know, extended family was very mistrustful of doctors, rightfully so, like, and very mistrustful of hospitals. But also, like by the same token, I grew up in churches, different churches where faith healing was a very prominent idea. I remember in college, my at the time boyfriend, future ex-husband's best friend and roommate, like I just like had mentioned casually that I had a migraine because this is an everyday occurrence that's been happening since I was 8 years old. And this dude, like, and he was well intentioned, but he also was from like big faith healing history. And he was just like, well, Gina, it's just a matter of faith. And like went to, you know, like pray over me that the migraine would go away. Of course it didn't. You know, it went away eventually because I had Imitrex, because thank God for modern medicine. But also, like, that idea, I think, is an interesting center of the Venn diagram between like witchcraft, new age, spiritual, like whatever particular off the beaten path, like belief system that someone's professing. And a lot of like evangelical Christianity is this like central belief that like the mind or spirit can somehow overcome the body. Like the flesh is, it's either that like the flesh is weak, per Christianity, or within like witchcraft, it's like this idea that, well, you can do anything and you can bend like reality to your will, which I think is true sometimes, but there are some asterisks there. And I think that disability and chronic illness are one of the biggest like poke holes in that idea that we have. Yeah. And it's interesting. Like I haven't encountered I'm going to call it faith healing because that's what I know it as. I haven't encountered that so much in the witchy spaces that I'm in, that we're in, but I'm curious for y'all's take on that.
Yeah, but you look like you were going to say something, so go ahead.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. My brain is buzzing. I think so many things about what you just said. And it's really interesting because when I was having this hospital experience, we had an outpouring, of support and love. And I'm sending you good energy. I'm sending you healing vibes. I'm lighting candles for you. I'm doing spells for you. I'm saying,
Yeah.
I had to
We did
really
that,
accept
right?
really quickly. Yeah. The two of you were like, our house might burn down with how many candles.
There's like literally always a candle on the altar for me. Like,
Yeah. I'm like, I'm so sorry.
it's
Like,
Casey now. Like,
get an electric one. Like, I'll pay for the batteries. You know what I mean?
Stop it.
Oh, yeah. It'll be a copay at this point. But
Oh.
like, I just, yeah, we had so many people. I had to become really okay really quickly with a lot of my longtime family friends saying they were praying for me because that is like a little bit of a thing for me. And I just had to say, you know what? It is all love. At this point, it's all love. It doesn't matter what word you use. Like it's love, it's healing, it's support, and it's vital in this time.
Yeah.
And I had doctors saying, sometimes, literally, the ER doctor said to me, sometimes bad things happen to good people. And I looked at Stacy and I went, am I dying? Like, this was a real experience that we had. And then no one changed their stance on that. I was meeting with a palliative care team 3 days into my hospitalization before anything had even been like officially diagnosed. And then we spent weeks, all the way to 36 days trying to find cancerous tissue in my body. And they couldn't find it. And Stacy started saying, I want to put on the table that when you got here, you had everything they said you had. And then so many people did magic on your behalf, in whatever form that worked for them, that you don't have it anymore and that you will heal from this and maybe we'll never find it. And I was like, we kept saying that, like not as, and if anybody here knows my wife, that's like not her vibe at
No.
all. Like
No.
this was
right,
like,
actually, because that's
yeah, like not her vibe. But we kept saying it, and more people were like, oh, we really like that theory. We love that theory. And I was like, yes. And also, I'm going to need some major real life signs that I can empirically stand upon.
Yeah.
Like, because right now the doctoral consensus is that that's not what's happening here.
Yeah.
So I think the line between like faith and reality, for lack of a better word.
Sure.
But it is a line.
Yeah.
And it's one that a lot of spiritual practitioners like to pretend does not exist.
I know.
Faith
Yeah.
is called faith for a reason. Like it's 'cause it's not something you can prove. There are other words for belief or trust or relationship, but faith is a specific word with a specific meaning.
Faith is belief in things not seen.
Right.
Like it is belief in the promise. It's belief in the hope. I feel like I'm just channeling all my past pastors right now.
You are, right?
They're just like getting the sermon rhythm.
Like, no.
Well, I will say, when we talk about community, like church communities really thrive in crisis,
Girl, yep,
and
they do.
for better and for worse. Like
Yeah.
church communities are incredible in crisis,
Hmm.
and it also feeds whatever anybody's looking to give and receive. So, it's two sides of the same coin,
Yeah.
and much, much more. But yeah, I had these, okay, when I was finally able to go down to the gift shop, uh, so I went into the hospital with a broken back and then ultimately got myself to a hysterectomy with complications on Christmas Eve. And they found stage 4 endometriosis. So then I was like, I have multiple advanced stage diseases that I didn't know I had. Like, how is this even
Yeah.
possible? But I was finally able to go to the gift shop and I bought these two little statues. One was like a healing Buddha, and the
Mm.
other was another like Hindu deity that was supposed to remove obstacles. And I was like, great, let's build a little altar in the room. And it was just those two statues and like a succulent that was in a box that a friend had sent me. And like, that was my altar
Yeah.
in the hospital, but I hadn't had one. Like I was like, I cannot touch magic in any way, shape, or form, or a tool or anything
Yeah.
for weeks.
Hmm.
And then ultimately, like my hospital experience ended really traumatically and like really awfully. And when my mom and wife were cleaning up the hotel room, I kept calling it that.
Look,
The
you
joke.
basically lived there for
Yeah,
over a
you
month,
did.
I know.
so
I was like, "Ah, this hotel room really needs a microwave." Like,
the amenities here are awful.
oh yeah.
Room
Um,
service sucks.
Some bitch comes in at 3 a.m. to take my blood every day. Like, what
I can't opt
vampire
out of
hotel
that.
is
Like,
this?
Terrible, terrible. Yes, a phlebotomist's favorite time is 4:20, not the fun kind. Yeah. Um, I scream cried. You can just throw those statues away. They didn't work anyway. Like I was livid.
Yeah.
They're in my bag now. I take them to doctor's appointments. I'm trying to give them another chance. But I think like that's, I think
Yeah.
magic gets complicated when health is involved because
yeah.
there are just things that magic is not going to work for.
Hmm.
And so then it becomes what Meg was talking about, belief and trust and like
Yeah.
what makes you feel good. And if it doesn't feel good to hold a belief that is not true anymore, then release it. But there's a lot of grief in that too. So
Yeah, 100%. No, I'm so glad you shared that story because I know that there was so much trauma, like layers and layers and layers of trauma in this experience, and that this experience that isn't really over yet. But I do think that like faith, which I know is such a loaded word, but like spiritual practice, magic, spiritual relationships, deity relationships, ancestor relationships can just become so fraught and can feel really fragile or spiky or not comforting when we're in moments, I think, especially of really acute like health crises or I know when I'm in periods of really significant insomnia or when I haven't had a like depressive spiral episode for a long time now, but in those dark moments, it's like it doesn't necessarily feel comforting or good or soothing or helpful to like fall into spiritual routine in that same way. It can feel like we either need something different or like we want to go somewhere different. And I think that's such an interesting thing to think about in this
Yeah.
particular intersection of like, where is spirituality really comforting? Where does it challenge us? And where is it like, this actually isn't what I want at all right now. I actually want something completely different, like a hug or to scream into a pillow or to scream at a nurse or whatever. But like, not that you did that, but you know what I mean? Like, needing some other kind of outlet or some other kind of support or some other kind of action that's actually going to just feel a lot better than our usual spiritual practice.
I appreciate like what B said earlier too, though, about or maybe Meg did. I forget.
Mm.
You both are saying such brilliant things, but around how this is what we train for. And I think that's
Healthy.
so like when these kinds of more, I know we've been speaking more to like crisis periods than the sustained kind of like every day at this point. I'm sure we'll get to that in a bit. But I think there really is something to having a practice that holds you in the everyday, normal, mundane. Like, so because this is something I think I find with a lot of my clients is like they will reach, and it's very real to reach for astrology, for answers when you don't have any that are like available to you in your doctor's chart. Like it's very tempting to reach for, oh, like we've been stricken with this horrible illness and like suddenly you're like, oh, I'm going to cleanse my house or something. Like it's like as opposed to cultivating the everyday. This is why I'm just such a proponent, I think, of like just the everyday shit. Like I talk to my ancestors every day. Like and at this point it's a practice, so that when quote unquote bad things happen, like I might get pissy at them, but the relationship can withstand it. Like, and the relationship has been built in like outside of that crisis time. Like, I'm not going to say it's wrong to reach for faith or spiritual practice in times of crisis. Like, that happens for a reason. And also, I think there's a lot to be said for kind of understanding what your body can do, understanding what your mind can do and your heart, and establishing a practice that works for that you can go to in normal times, as much as whatever your baseline normal is, individually. I don't know if that made sense, but
No, totally makes
Totally
sense.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that then informs what you were talking about with the sustained daily life. Like,
yeah,
yes, this is a crisis period. And so that will
yeah,
call for and need different things.
yeah.
But in the everyday, yeah, it's like, what are those? And I think they can be so much smaller than any like Instagram witch will tell you at this point. I
Mhm.
think, Jeanna, what you were talking about with this everyday relationship is it gives you the ability to say like, I can't engage with this right now,
Yeah,
and
100%.
come back at a later date without shaming yourself or guilting
Yeah.
yourself. Because I think, at least for me, it becomes like, oh, and especially if you're like talking about any of this in public, not sharing your spells, but like sharing craft,
Yes.
essentially, craft tips.
Hmm.
I think then it becomes like, oh, my practice is shot at this point in my life, or like
Yeah.
I haven't even sat at my altar or pulled a card or whatever your
Yeah.
typical routine is in so long. Like, am I still a real witch? Should I even be talking about craft? Like, how can I tell others to get their practice up to snuff when like mine is horrible? And I yeah, I just have really struggled with that over the years, especially when there's like months long
Yeah.
periods of time where I'm not connected to any kind of
Hmm.
self. And also, I've recently had the experience of listening to what's coming through, firming up my practice in a way, even if it's just being present or what I'm saying on the forecast, or whatever,
Mhm.
and then taking my own advice and having a health experience that actually built a lot of self-trust
Yeah.
that is
Mhm.
a firm foundation for what comes next, and that is the day-to-day. So everyone, this is why I'm like, bodies, spiritual practices, like it's all so different, and I think that lens of homogeny is just really harmful because it makes us all feel like we should be doing something that, and sometimes it's like we feel like we should be doing something that we literally cannot do.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said something, B, about self-trust that I think it's kind of been mulling in the back of my mind is that so much to me of my practice that as it has developed organically and gone down some roads and then backtracked and gone down other roads and done that, like so much of what witchcraft is to me is self-trust. And it is a practice that ultimately is cultivating like your ability to be grounded in a world that is not built to work for any of us. And especially not built to work for some people more than others, but that's a different podcast. And I keep emphasizing, like, you know, ancestors, deity, like spirit relationships, because that is such a huge part of what I do. And other people I know are less into that. But to me, I'm like, there are relationships I have that I invest in and that they go both ways. So even, you know, like obviously it was a very different experience, B, but like, you know, you were no, I think you were out of the hospital by then. But like when we were on our honeymoon for 10 days, I wasn't tending my altars because they were here in the house. Like I did some praying and stuff, but not every day, not nearly what I usually like. But I was like, it's all good, you know? So many of them helped enable that trip to happen. And then I got to go and, you know, touch base when I get back or touch base when I'm like crying in the Seville Cathedral. Like, and and it's good. I think that that's also a really big part, at least for folks for whom like spirit relationships are also a really big thing, is kind of divorcing us ourselves and moving and like witchcraft really helping us to move away from that hyper individualist, hyper capitalist, like if I'm not touching it, if I'm not doing it in this moment, it's not real. It isn't happening, like the idea, like to my mind, like the spiritual, you know, realm, for lack of a better word, like that's going on whether I'm paying attention or not. And also I have some relationships that are going to persist in that even if I am in bed with a migraine for a few days. So like I miss my offering time or something. But also I will say part of, at least for me, like part of what has a part of the way that illness has really informed my practice is that I try to avoid like promising spirits that I will do things at set times because I know that I can't necessarily deliver on that. And so like I'm not going to make a pact with someone who is really strict about their offering schedule. Like I'm only going to really talk to people, work with people being spirits, but you know what I mean. I'm only going to
They're
do that
people.
with like folks who understand that I am a corporeal being and have a corporeal body and it needs to be fed and hydrated and taken care of when it's sick. I'm very also clear about that in like when talking to spirit. I'm like, I have a corporeal body. I appreciate that some things you work with don't need this, but I do because I am a person and I need to pay rent and I have my health bills.
No, I think that's all so real. And yeah, I think it also comes a little bit from what you were talking about, detaching from, well, first of all, time is completely different in spiritual
Mm-hmm.
happenings than on this 3D earth. And I think even just all of our collective experiences of every January being like 95 years long is
Mhm.
just proof
Boy.
to that.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think there's a lot of, at least for me, detaching my ideas of spirit relationships from that of like a punitive Old Testament God
Mm-hmm.
who
Yes.
punishes and has like unreachable standards and expectations and who delights in, you know, like I've really become attached to the book of Job in the last few years, and it actually was because somebody said, you're going to hate that I'm saying this to you, but like go back and read the book of Job, like that will be a
Yeah.
spiritual text for you in this time.
I
And I
mean,
was like,
yeah.
Mhm.
yeah, 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 yeah. You know, so it's hard. It's hard to be experiencing things that are like, why is this happening for me
Yeah.
or to me? And especially with the day-to-day stuff, it's like you have stuff you want to do. You have earthly goals that you want
Yeah.
to put into practice. And I think that's now I'm talking more about the creativity side of things, but I
Yeah.
know like the three of us are just unhinged makers. And so, you know, like yes, we should all hope for the honeymoon vibes of like everyone worked really hard to get us here and now we're just gonna have
Yeah.
a great time. And also, it's the times where you're like, I really just want to make this shit. Like, why
Mhm.
am I having a bed day today? Like, I
Yeah.
wanted, or I planned on writing. I felt really cool about that. Or we wanted to record an episode. And then you just have to be honest and say, like, it's not going to happen today. And that's hard to do without a lot of story and a lot of judgment.
Yeah, I think there is something to the what you said about like the punitive Old Testament God really being tied up in the civil civic religion of the US with the idea that something is only working if it's growing or it only works if it's getting better, like more money, healthy, whatever the fuck the healthy spectrum is. But like, thinness is what's getting sold to us as healthy these days. And we all know that just because you're thin does not mean you don't have stage 4 something or other. Like it's
Take it
not
from me. You might have multiple advanced diseases.
but
Happy 2025.
like I feel like so much of wellness culture, but like also like spirituality culture, especially within the US, sort of is also baked within that. If it doesn't grow, if it's not getting better, it's not working. And it's like that's actually not necessarily true. That also isn't why I do this. Like, I don't do magic just to get more things. That's not the point of it to me. But that's also a worldview issue. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's to like the goal of prayer is health. And like, yes, you want to be, we all want that. But a lot of like chronic
hmm
disabled, what disability means is like, this is not going to get better.
yeah.
Like,
And it,
it is how do we get through the day to day? And so, even that, like, wellness is not an attainable goal for people. And so, to put to put everything that we put around health and wellness on people who that's not possible for them,
yeah.
that should lead us into more care. It
Yeah.
shouldn't lead us into like erasure and, well, that's too much effort or they're
Right.
not meeting this body standard, so
It's like
eugenics. But
no,
like,
it's like the goal is connection. The goal, I don't know, when you're oriented toward relationship, like with yourself, with people around you, with the land, with spirit, with ancestors, with whoever, like when the goal is that, when you're and maybe not goal, when you're oriented toward
yeah,
connection, toward relationship, toward community care, I feel like that's a major first step for a lot of folks in terms of shifting. Perhaps what the initial draw was to witchcraft was like, it's going to help me get over a broken heart. It's going to give me answers for like why this horrible thing in my family happened. Like, I need more money. I just got laid off. Like, even if that's initially a spark that gets you interested, like, I feel like for at least for all of us, like, we are at a point where it's like the point is connection. I don't know. I don't feel like I'm saying that well. Also,
you
Meg,
are.
what do you think?
I know we've talked a lot.
No, it's all y'all were bouncing off each other and I was like, I'm just gonna listen and enjoy this. I'm like trying to coalesce a thought around like the expectation of consistency and routine that seems to apply to spirituality, health, and creativity. And I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like, and so like what you said, what y'all were talking about when it around like the punitive Old Testament God, and even just like thinking about how I was not allowed to like opt out of church growing up, had the expectation that like this is when we worship. This is the expectation. We go to church. We submit to God. We confess our sins. We connect with people. We do the thing. And like you can't have a relationship with God if you're not going to church every Sunday, whether you
Mm-hmm.
want to go or not. And there were plenty of Sundays that I didn't want to go, but it wasn't because of my faith. It was because I didn't like routine. And as the older I have gotten, the more I have realized that trying to cling to creative and spiritual and health routines are all the worst things for me. I'm not a routine based bitch. I am a chaos gremlin. And that's actually highly beneficial to my creative process and to my spiritual practices and to my health. Every time I try to, I'm currently using an app right now that is really, really cute that's around developing routines. And I can already feel myself being like, well, I'm just never going to go for a walk again because it's on my list. And like, even though I am really bad about going outside these days because the outside is bad and I'm just hermiting so hard these days. But also my body hurts all the time, so whatever. But I think there's just something to, and I don't have like a clear, coherent, beautiful sentence about this, but
No,
I think I'm
that
just thinking about the expectation of, well, if you just work out all the time and eat really healthy all the time, you're going to be healthy. And if you just go to church or have an altar that you tend every day, or say the same prayers all the time, or always do the rosary, or do your spells really consistently, or have a coven or whatever, then your spiritual life is going to be really rich. And if you can just make yourself sit down and write for an hour every morning, or do your little morning pages, or, you know, set your deadlines for your creative project, or have a group where you're all co-working together or whatever, then you can do whatever creative project you want. And I am sure that for some people that works really well. I know it does. I know people that it works well for. I think I'm sitting with a few of them, but I have so strongly rebelled against that. And the older I get, the more I feel like a responsibility to talk about it, because I think we're not all built for that. And I think especially if you're sick, or you were raised in a high control religion, or, you know, XYZ, it's so important to gift yourself that gift of flexibility and say, does this actually work for me? Does this actually feel good? Or am I just lost in this guilt spiral where I think if I'm not doing the thing with some kind of frequency that someone else decided or told me was morally good, that I can't be these things. And I don't want to do the silver lining of being sick, because I don't think that's a thing. I don't think everything has to have a silver lining. I think sometimes the tower just sucks, and it's just the tower and it just sucks. But I do think that one thing that, like, my insomnia and my depression, but especially my insomnia, has taught me that, like, you can't girl boss, gender neutral, your way out of, like, being sick or out of doing certain things. Like, sometimes you have to just say, what is my capacity, my actual capacity right now? And how does that line up with what has to get done? And how can I ask for help or give myself kindness so that I can actually make it to accomplishing this whenever I'm ready to accomplish it? That's my soapbox. I'll get off it now.
No, I
Beautiful soapbox.
love your soapbox,
Yeah.
and being with you, Meg, has like taught me so much about many different ways to work. I think something that gets missed in the routine conversation by almost everyone is that for many of us, routines are our coping mechanism. Like, routines are like, I keep a really rigorous calendar because I learned very early in life, in hindsight, this was ADHD brain. If I don't write it down, it's gone. It's absolutely, it's in the wind. It's never going to happen. I'm going to ghost that person. I'm going to miss that appointment. So, like, for me, the really rigid, strict scheduling I do with my calendar, with, like, sometimes my writing, I'm in a season of not doing that right now. That's its own thing. But, like, that's a coping strategy for my mental health. That's literally, like, that's an outgrowth of that. And it's like, is it that I'm motivated to do it, or that I just know that my life will collapse if I don't? Like,
and that's real, you know, and I'm not trying to shit on routines. It's a tool you can use if it works for you, but I don't think it's a thing you have to force yourself to do if it actually actively hurts you. Like, when I try to force myself to write every day or work on a creative schedule,
and you
it's
already
like,
do write every day. That's the
so
thing.
fucking
No,
much,
you
y'all.
do. You already do that. Like, that's the wild thing.
I
You're
don't
like
need a
the
routine
most.
to do it. It just happens.
Well, and I think the word that we haven't said yet is discipline. And
Yeah,
that,
oh God, yes.
and
Yeah.
there are
Discipline.
multiple ways to look at discipline, you know?
Yeah.
And we, again, we have a very punitive sense of discipline
Yes.
in Western culture that says if we are not doing, then we are bad and useless, you know? And
Oh
so
my God, yeah.
this all gets really warped, especially if you have diminished capacity and whatever that means for you. And so, yeah, discipline can really quickly be an aspect of using a tool like scheduling or routine or whatever, and it can really quickly become a way to punish ourselves if we're not doing it, if we can't ultimately, like, hit the thing or do the thing. So what I really heard from you, Meg, was just another affirmation of, like, we are all having a collective experience, yes, but when it comes to chronic health and disability and magical practices and creative practices, it is really about knowing yourself on an individual level and being hyper, like, if you can do anything, it's like, just be more of yourself, you know, like,
Yes.
hyper authentic, hyper honest, hyper vulnerable to say, this is what I can do today, or this is what I would like to do. And then just showing up the best you can, like in every
Yeah.
moment with like gentleness, but also, yeah, self-trust. Like if you know that a schedule is just going to make you angry, then like don't have a
Then
schedule.
don't do the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. But Meg has taught me a lot, especially for because so many of my clients these days, my astrology clients, like I feel like half the time I'm just talking to them about witchcraft. I'm just talking to them about setting up altars because that's a thing I do, or about like developing planetary relationships. But inevitably, depending on the person's chart, I'm like, altars might not work for you. Like, and it might be a you are the altar situation, which I
Mhm.
think is especially helpful for chaos gremlins and for like, which is what Meg has specifically taught me. It's like Meg will just put on a piece of jewelry that's very like mercurial, for example, and be
This
like,
is the
Mercury
Venus
day.
Pico piece.
Yeah, like,
Yes,
you
this was
know,
my, I felt like this was the right
I
sweatshirt for
love
this
it.
conversation, and that's it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like and I think that gets to what you were saying much earlier, B, too, about how you don't need, the tools are nice. The tools are nice, they're
Yeah.
helpful, like, and, you know, can help deepen your practice in different ways. But ultimately, you are the altar. And this is also something that I think it's like folks with varying, you know, levels of physical disability, like mental health, chronic illness, like we all know this, and so do, and this is my other piece of my background, like so do working class and poor people.
Mhm.
Like this is like know how to do magic, even if they don't call it that, without spending a fuck ton of money,
Yeah.
because it's like you go, you take a stick, you draw sigils in the dirt outside your house. Like you grow an herb in your garden and you put it, or like that's literally what it is. And I think there's so much like utility and ability to work and an acceptance of like working with what we have that, especially with the like commodification and, you know, Instagramification of witchcraft, it's
Mhm.
like the tools don't make the witch. Like the intention and connection do.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't want to talk too much about my own personal practice, but I will share that as a sixth house mercurial person, as someone who like a lot of I have a very everything I do is magical kind of energy vibe preference thing, which is why some days the only spiritual thing I do is put on a necklace that I have kind of consecrated to a particular deity or planet, and I go, today's for you, I guess, and then I go do whatever the hell I'm going to do, even if it's just laying on the couch for 12 hours and then I get back in bed. Like, but sometimes that's the only spiritual, and I'm using big air quotes for people who are listening, thing that I do that day. And for me, that's great. That's fine. Like,
Mhm.
again, to your point, Gina, like I work with deities and planets and ancestors who are cool with my deal and who are going to be kind about it. And anyone who doesn't fuck with that, who's not okay with the fact that I'm sick a lot and that I can't do things a lot and that I lose my words a lot,
Yeah.
we're just not hanging out, and it's fine. They can hang out with somebody else. That's fine. But a lot of my spiritual practice is very mundane. Like I bless the coffee kind of
Mhm.
person. I bless the food while I'm cooking it kind of person. I am a, spraying house sprays around the house and saying thank you person. But like I don't do a lot of spells. I don't keep altars, and most of my rituals are incredibly simple and basic, adding a little bit of salt to the coffee grounds before I brew the coffee as protection. That's the whole thing. And I think that as someone who's chronically ill, as someone who doesn't like a lot of routine, I think that it's really helpful to expand our perspective on what ritual looks like and what magic
Mhm.
means and what spiritual relationship entails. Because, yeah, it doesn't have to include thousands of dollars worth of equipment, essentially, for a
Yeah.
witchcraft practice. It doesn't have to include hours of prayer. It can if you want it to. There's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
it. But I think framing it like everything has to look a certain way is just a different way of trying to control each other. And I don't like that. So,
I
Yeah.
think there is something around also just like calling out explicitly. Like, I feel like we all know this, but just to say it explicitly for the listeners, like spirituality, huge umbrella.
yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
Huge umbrella.
huge.
Witchcraft, huge umbrella.
Mhm.
Meg and I practice, like, we're married. Yes, we sometimes will do something together, but like, our practices are very, very, very different.
Totally different.
We have very different spirit relationships. Like, and so what
With
it,
some of the same energies, like
Mhm.
literally different
Yeah.
relationships with the same things.
Yeah. And so, because like we have a lot of altars in the house, they're all mine. Like, and I will sometimes like lock myself in the office and like spend an hour doing a working, which does not happen a lot, but like it happened this week. So it's very top of
Yeah.
mind. Like, I took the time, I went like around the city, I gathered different material, I burned it down into an app, like made a jar, did a whole fucking thing. I'll talk very, yeah. So, like, I spent a lot of time putting energy and work and like literal travel gathering things into this spell. Meg would never. Like,
I think it's so cool. And no, I would never.
yeah, well, also because but also this is the thing. It's like, this is where having examples of very, very different people who practice in such different ways is so helpful, especially people who are like also chronic illness girlies, because they're going to show, like, I remember, especially as someone who just, I don't like that I'm a rule follower, but
I'm a
like, I
rule
try,
follower too, Gina. It's okay.
It's
I
okay. We can't
really,
all be rebels, baby.
I know.
Meg is like OG punk, like, punk bad kid, like all
They
of
really
that.
are.
And I am a recovering, like, I know that you had a phase of like people pleasing eldest daughter, Meg,
Of
but
course.
like, I feel like I was in that for a very long time and I'm still recovering from it. But like, I remember when I first was interested in witchcraft, like more, like, which is, it coincided unsurprisingly with my coming out, leaving the church, all of that. And like, remember I ordered some books off of Amazon because I didn't know better. And, they were, like practical, like magic 101 kind of books, but they were very insistent, like that you had to be sitting on the ground and
Oh,
like
yeah.
doing a fucking, and this was like February in Boston, and we had had more snow that winter than ever before. So like, I was like, there are 3 feet of snow outside. I can't go sit on the ground. So I literally put the book away. I was like, oh, I guess I'll do this like in 6 months. And I took it so literally and as a rule that I didn't imagine, hey, I live in a place where it's winter, where there's snow, and I can't go fucking sit on the ground for 6 hours and meditate. So maybe what if I adjust it to be in my bedroom and I can still do the visualization? I just wasn't there. I was still so locked in. And I don't really have a point about that, just that I think that so much of this is about identifying how we think and breaking and starting to kind of like experiment and break out, and yeah.
Well, and give yourself permission to practice in the ways that are available to you and that feel good to you. Like ultimately, if you're holding yourself to a standard that you have to be sitting on the ground in a certain position, and then that's literally not available to you, then that's not going to be craft that feels good to you. And
Yeah.
all of this, like, I really, oh, it's 11:11. Hello.
Oh,
Hey.
Honorary to everyone who's listening. Uh, it just is not helpful. Again, like that invites you into like you're doing something wrong instead of you're connecting with something that makes you feel really good and supported and
Mhm.
is meaningful to you and
Yeah.
helpful to you in that time. I I just have to share, like, while you were both were speaking about things, I know I had shared with Meg and Gina before getting on here that I feel very not at home in my office anymore,
Mhm.
like in my space, because it's kind of just become a catch-all for bags that haven't been unpacked from the hospital or just things that arrived during the holiday season that I wasn't here to receive. And I do need to get in here. But I also am like, looking around at all my stuff and going, oh, wow, like Gina, you running all over the city. Like I set up a really quickie altar
Yeah.
for a friend, like a beloved who is going through major, major heart health stuff, which is
Mm.
so scary.
So
Yeah.
scary.
And I really quickly was like, oh, she needs an altar. She needs a candle, beep, 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 like shopping in my own life and my own
Yeah.
space.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it doesn't have to be witchy tools. Like she's a writer. I put her book on the altar. Like she
Yeah.
needs it,
Love it.
like, so it's a book. It was a tea candle that we bought as part of like a disaster go bag. And I was like, this is the candle that
Tea
is
lights are
going.
awesome for spell work.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's the
So
only way I can burn as many candles as I do is because they're
yeah,
all little itty bitty. Like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mine are
totally.
packs of like 400.
The tea light collection is strong.
It's
Yeah, but
strong.
I just feel like they don't even have to be necessarily like spiritual tools. Like you can shop in your own space and then you can
Mhm.
also do no shopping at all. You can just be like, in this moment, I'm building her an altar in my mind and this is what I would put on it. Like this is where your visualization, like imagination work comes in really handy because sometimes
Mhm.
that's all you can do.
Yeah. Mental prayer.
Yeah,
Mental
yeah,
prayer is
that's
the
what,
thing. It's so
yeah.
wild too. I've been thinking a lot about that because when we were in, well, I love Saint Teresa of Avila, and she's like very important to me. And I was wanting to go to Avila as a little day trip from Madrid, and we didn't make it out, but it's okay next time. But I bring this up just because she is one of the first people. I don't want to say the first because I may be wrong on my Catholic history there, but she's one of the first people to articulate mental prayer
Mm.
as like basically like praying outside, solitary outside of the group, outside of the rosary, outside of, the different hours, like liturgical hours that were kept. And she talked a lot like in her journals about just praying in her silently in her mind. And that was like revelatory when
Mhm.
her work was published. So just to also say, like, because I feel like sometimes people who don't have a religious background approach witchcraft and they're like, are you just like thinking are you just saying it? Are you just thinking? It's like, yeah, that's it. Like you can
Yeah.
think it, you can write it, you can say it, you can sing it,
Mhm.
like, but mhm. like like the idea also that everything has to be verbal. I'm like, wow, way too shit on the witchcraft of deaf folks and hard of
Mhm.
hearing folks. Like it's so anyway. Yeah.
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 No, and I think about this a lot because, like, obviously there are lots of different tools you can use for different things, but when most people think of tarot, they're thinking of a tactile, physical tarot deck. But
Mhm.
there are decks of all different shapes and sizes, and some decks are really hard to shuffle. I do okay with my hands, but I was a freelance photographer for over a decade, and I get real bad cramps in my palms. So sometimes I can't shuffle the cards very well, or I can't really hold them very well. And my hands are small
My
anyway, so
hands are
some decks
small.
are so sometimes it's hard for me to shuffle certain decks, especially if they're like oversized or really thick cardstock. But I get asked from folks all the time who don't have full mobility in their hands or arms or shoulders, like, can I read tarot if I can't shuffle a tarot deck? Or do you have alternative ways to shuffle decks? And it's like, of course we do. Like, digital decks are an option.
Yeah.
You can work with tarot in lots of ways that don't require shuffling, but there's also so many different ways to shuffle the cards. And listening to y'all talking about like accessibility and stuff in magic in particular, it makes me think about like just adjusting yoga postures, like using
Mhm.
blocks, using blankets, using straps, using modified poses. It doesn't stop being yoga just because you're doing a pose that respects the like abilities and capacities and flexibility that day of your body. It's allowing you to do the thing in a way that actually works for you. So it's actually going to have the benefit that you want it to have or allow you to be present in the way you want to be present. And I feel like that's kind of what we're talking about here is just being generous with yourself and thinking about, okay, what is my spiritual practice? What am I working towards? What kind of vibe am I looking for? And what's going to help me actually do that instead of trying to force myself to do a pose that might harm me, like literally
Mhm.
cause physical damage because I'm not in that space.
No, and I'm glad you said digital decks because I was thinking this whole time of shouting out Moonlight,
I
which
know, Moonlight's so
Mhm.
great.
yeah, it's so great. And I know like Meg and I are both professionals on that platform. So this is not an advertisement. This
I've
is like,
never given an actual reading on the platform. I hang out there. I think it's rad, but I don't because I don't have a schedule. It's,
oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
vibes. I'm like I tell you I don't schedule
Well, but
things.
that's also, sorry, not to interrupt, we'll get back to the Moonlight, but
Yeah.
that's also like a really big difference in how we do our client practice because
Totally.
I can schedule a very limited number, but
Mhm.
like Meg does not do live readings
I
because
can't.
what if Meg hasn't slept for like 3 days straight? Like that's not gonna happen. And I feel like my capacity is so low anyway. Like I can really only do like 2 or 3 readings a week.
Totally. But
But
like
yeah, like you have to schedule yourself or find a style of like reading for clients that works for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my entire business is based around the fact that I don't sleep. And so like having and I mean, and I've done a couple collaborative live things with folks, and like Jeanna and I are doing the Grove. We're doing it together in
Mhm.
part because
Yeah.
we can do it together. So if I'm
Yeah.
too tired to speak, literally, like she can do the heavy lifting on the day of. But yeah, my whole business is based around asynchronous resources and readings, because I'm not going to give somebody a reading if I haven't slept for 4 days. They're not going to get that
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it sucks for me. It sucks for them. It sucks all around. We're not going to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Moonlight. But I love
Yeah. Oh,
Moonlight.
Moonlight. Yes.
No, that's so
No,
real.
I'm glad you said that, babe.
And yeah, I really like Moonlight,
Yeah.
and as a user, like it's so nice to just be able to open a room, and I love their new internet lore tarot deck. It's
I know
like
you've been using it so
so
much.
good.
It's so cute.
When I was in the hospital, I pulled a card on Moonlight for each of the months. Like I did a little like New Year reading, and
Mm.
my pact with myself was that I didn't have to interpret anything now. I was like, I'm just going to
Mm,
Mhm.
pull the cards
Love
and I'm going to
that.
make note of
nice.
them. And like, I am doing this because, we have reached January 1st on some piece of paper. And
I still haven't done my year ahead for 2025, and it's February,
you don't
so
have to. I
I'm
don't think
clearly
it's
not
the
going
new
to.
year. Yeah. And I have been cracking up at how the cards have just been so spot on and showing up.
Mm.
It's been so wild. And so I think that also is a testament to timing and
Mhm.
knowing yourself and trusting your own practice and trusting your connection, that it's like, okay, I'm going to pull these cards right now, and then they're not going to mean anything to me until 2 months, three
Yeah.
months, 6 months down the line.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be reminded of them in the right time, because someone somewhere is going to show it to me, and, or, I'm going to think about it and be like, oh yeah, that card really did track. I just think if you have the capacity to pull the cards and nothing else, like that's chill.
Yeah. Totally chill.
It'll all happen when it's meant to happen.
I think that's such a good point about freeing yourself from the obligation of making meaning. Like I feel like
Mhm.
half of what I do with astrology clients. I'm like, this is happening. Like maybe you have an idea sometimes of what this transit involves, but astrology is honestly like best looked at in hindsight. Like it's
Yeah.
like because you're
Yeah.
not, there are thousands of significations for every planet, every sign, every combination, like everything. And how it specifically is going to show up for like two people arguably having the same transit with the same chart, but they have totally different lived contexts, it's going to be different. And so I just want to like echo and affirm the value of making meaning in hindsight. It's why memoirists generally don't write a memoir as something is going on. Like you write it once you have a clearer idea of a narrative there.
Yeah.
This has been so juicy. Yeah, I feel like if we just want to share last thoughts, like
Yeah.
anything that's still knocking around on anyone's list or mind or heart.
Yeah. Lightning round, last thoughts.
Yeah.
I think something that's popping right now in my brain is that there's some conversations happening on social around exercising your muscles around and practicing rebellion, practicing breaking rules, practicing not just submitting to authority just because they are authority.
Mm,
And these are useful skills in all kinds of areas of life. But I think it feels really relevant right now to both like practice breaking rules around what you think is spiritual or you think is magical or you think is possible for you and your body or your brain, and finding that balance between the ways that you really do know yourself and the things that you know work for you, as well as the things that you've been told you should do and kind of the standard that you hold yourself to without really questioning the standard. And so I don't know if this is like a super cohesive thought, but I'm thinking about how magically we can build those muscles too by trying new kinds of things, by expanding our perspective on what is spiritual and how spiritual practices can be part of our lives, even if it doesn't always look like taking a tarot deck out and doing a reading. Sometimes I just think about a card for a few minutes, or I just notice that the conversation I'm in or the action that I'm doing or the idea I have reminds me of a card, and I go, huh, that's cute. And that's the whole thing. But that's not spiritual, right? And so I think one of my takeaways and things that I'm going to be thinking about walking away from this conversation is really, what does it mean to start to build up that muscle and flex that muscle of showing yourself compassion when it comes to spiritual practice, given what you already know about your body and your brain and your heart and your cravings for spiritual connection? And how can you really build a practice, spiritual, creative, and otherwise, that actually suits you, even if it butts up against the shoulds that might be rattling around in your brain, or like learned behaviors from things.
From all of the things.
From all the things, yeah, from the world, from the way you grew up, from, you know, the expectations we have on ourselves, from the ways that we don't fit whatever normal is, and might feel some kind of way about that. Yeah.
Mine builds on that, so I will just add a gentle TLDR reminder that trust is built over time. Trust is trust in yourself, trust in your practice. It takes time. Like, odds are high. I mean, maybe if this happens for you, I love that. But like, odds are high that you're not going to necessarily start working with a new spirit relationship and immediately feel all the intimacy and all the presence and all, you know, like sometimes, but probably it's like you're meeting a new person and you have to introduce yourself and ask about that. Like it's a relationship like any other, and it just takes time, and that's okay. And it's okay if you have days or weeks where you don't feel it. Like, because, yeah, like, especially in a body that is experiencing like sickness or limitation, like, yeah, probably sometimes you're not, and that's okay. It's still there.
Yeah, is it Adrienne Mary Brown that talks about moving at the speed of trust? I feel like that
Oh,
goes
I probably.
for trusting your body, trusting your capacity, trusting what actually works for you, trusting your spiritual relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah, just feels like a useful phrase.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to share something that just happened in real time because that's how I'm experiencing life and chronic illness and spirituality, is like what's happening moment to moment. So I have an ongoing flirtation with Loki.
Yes.
And all of this is under the umbrella of I am a trash magic witch who really is more on the Meg side of things. Like my creative practice gets to have way more of a schedule than
Sure.
my spiritual practice. So I'm chaotic as well. But I've had a chaotic relationship going with Loki for a few years now. And when we first were like, oh, it's you. Like, oh, it's you. Oh, that's who I'm speaking with. I was doing a yoga practice and I was in a child's pose and a spider crawled into my child's pose and I freaked out. And I was like laying on my mat going, okay, spider, like, I know that you're there. I'm going to get you outside, but like, please don't crawl on me because I can't move. And then I was like, okay, and also Loki, like we could have just said hey to each other, like you can send me a whole spider in my child's pose, like
Been an email.
right, exactly, like just at me next time, you know. So, super chaotic relationship with. I lit a candle before we started recording, and I decided to light the Shapeshifter candle that I have from Odin's daughter, which is inspired by Loki, the trickster god. And Shapeshifter is just like an archetype that I really resonate with. Like I'm a lunar ruled person. I just think also for chronic illness and like you do have to shift sometimes literal physical, like you were talking about getting organs removed, Jeanna, like that's shape shifting, you know, like sometimes it is really deeply physical. Anyway, I lit that candle and it's been gurgling over here this whole time. And you said trust is built over time, and that candle blew out. Like with a clom. Like it's one of those wood, like sizzle, like
Yeah.
get the crackling. And you were like, trust is built over time. And Loki was like, sizzle.
That's amazing.
Heard.
Heard. Yeah.
Everyone watching on YouTube is going to see my face when it happens, too.
I can't wait to watch this back and wait for the moment. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I think my final thought just is that stay open to whatever it looks like for you, that trust does take time and these practices take time. And it takes time to know yourself as well,
Yeah.
like that. And you can just start by paying attention to things in a different way or being open to receiving new information. And it's hard when things are changing and when you have cycles of sickness and cycles of health, and sometimes one lasts longer and then the other lasts longer, or you're ready to move out of one before it happens. And I just think all of that is kind of part of the boots on the ground, like 3D life experience as a human being. And so, yeah, I think magic and illness and madness are like just always kind of kissing each other in this lifetime, and we're just along for the ride.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen to that.
Sometimes it's Loki's world and you're just living in it.
Apparently today it's Loki's world and we're all just living in it.
As the non-mercurial person in the room, I would not know what that is like. But the trust.
It's just vibes, babe. It's just vibes.
It's just vibes. It's just
Vibes.
vibes. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, this has been so great. Just thank you. I know obviously we've wanted to do this for a long time and it sadly has only become more relevant, but I just am so grateful that we finally sat down and talked about ourselves and like what's going on in our life. And then I'm so excited to connect with the Coven because I know, we have so many Coven members who are dealing with their own version of events.
Truly.
What's in your queer starter pack?
Get in the comments.
Get in the comments.
Right. Out yourselves on public forums. Thank you.
By all means.
If you feel so inclined.
We also have a Patreon. You can talk to us there. It's a little bit more private.
Yes. Okay. So because we are a podcast, we will say, please reach out to us however that feels comfy for you, whether it's in the comments. You can email us at callyourcoven@gmail.com. You can join us on Patreon. Chronic illness has made it so that our Patreon is still just a supportive tier, but I would also say at this point, supporting us is necessary and really deeply appreciated and helpful. And we're just grateful for that support. And yes, we're still on social media, even though times are weird, Instagram at Call Your Coven, I guess. Yeah.
For as long as that's a thing.
It's hard to get excited about Instagram right now. I'm not going to lie to you, but we are still there.
We look at it every once in a while.
We do.
And yes, we all have our own things going on as well. Meg has 3 a.m. Tarot and Devils and Fools, and both Jeanna and Meg have The Grove, and then Jeanna has Astrology for Writers, and I have Swimming in the Soup. So there are tons of ways to connect with us further and support the work that we are doing, and support our lives. I mean, I think that's kind of the end of this, is we are all just passing the same $20 around the table.
That is,
so
I think about that
literally.
once a week. Like, that's all queerness is. It's just
Truly.
sending each other money.
And chronic illness, actually. It's like, oh, who's sick? Who's having surgery today? Okay, we're gonna, the meal train now shifts to you. Like,
yeah. I do think the $50 Venmo has gone to all of us at this
100%.
Yeah.
I think it's cute.
I do too.
Also, what would be great is if in the YouTube comments or podcast comments or on social or whatever, let us know if you like this conversation format, because we definitely have some other topics that we've talked about talking about, but I know this is a little bit more free form of a format than our usual forecasts or individual episodes, and would love to hear how y'all like it, because they're really fun to record. So yeah, just would love to hear some feedback from that as well.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will talk to you soon. We'll be back soon with the March forecast. That sounds cuckoo bananas. So we're not going to think about that yet.
No.
And thank you for being here, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, everyone.